Welcome to the Life Chat Podcast, seeking the truth with Derek Powell, navigating you through. Every Wednesday night, new topics ignite. Join the journey, let's take flight. Bringing insights that change our view. Derek's voice, clear and true. Tune in each week, discover new light. Life Chat Podcast, reach a new height.
Hello, everybody. Welcome once again to Life Chat Podcast. Thank you for joining me tonight. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to be a part of the conversation, which is trauma and recovery, featuring the Addict'S advocate, Mr. Dusty Dean. And the reason why, to me, this episode right here is kind of special is because of the fact that Mr. Dean, Mr. Dusty Dean, Mr. Dean is on the West Coast, Pacific time. So that's where the difference came in, with the time schedule and starting at this time. But we're gonna do what we do normally. We're gonna jump right into it after I bring on Mr. Dusty Dean, the Addict'S advocate. How you doing, Dusty?
I'm good, Derek. Hey, thanks for having me on, and thanks for working your schedule to make this happen. This is a good thing. So,
thank you for being a part of it, man. I appreciate you. I just want to talk a little bit about who we have tonight, who you are, what you do, and just a little bit about how we met. I was going to start with how we met first, and then you can elaborate on who you are and what you do. We initially met on TikTok. I reached out to each other, and we started corresponding on TikTok, man. And I always try to explain to people how powerful these social media sites are. As long as we stay away from the BS and we're working on business, these social media sites are great networking tools. So I just wanted to throw that out there for the people that were watching and people that will watch later. But I would like for you, Dusty, to give a little bit about who you are and what you do and why this topic means so much to you.
hey, Derek. No, I appreciate this. I agree with you that social media definitely can have its pitfalls, right? So I was never, ever, not one iota in social media until I started my own podcast, and purely for helping people understand what addiction recovery looks like. I think that there's a lot of misnomers, there's a lot of myths, and there's a lot of shame and guilt associated with even trying to get sober. And so I think fortunately society is at a point now where we're really starting to see the benefits of sobriety. And I know that there's actually been downticks in a lot of consumption for a lot of different generations because they recognize it. And I think that's a beautiful thing. I myself personally am approaching sobriety of 2 years here in August. And so about roughly, literally within 15 days of being in a detox, I recognized that I was getting a lot of good information that I had no idea was the truth about what's happening in recovery, what addiction is truly all about, why people unfortunately put themselves in an endless loop, why it's just not simply about stopping using and it's a lifestyle change, and the importance of it, and the blessings that provide that come with that understanding and that education and that growth in recovery. I know tonight we're going to be talking about trauma and also in how it relates to recovery. And what's interesting is what I've found is, as we live life, our lives get muddied. We experience more. We have a lot of, things that impact us in certain ways. And so sometimes we get ourselves into a bind where we inadvertently start using something to cope with, right? Like, I'm going to have myself a cocktail at the end of the day. And slowly but surely it slips into something that becomes uncontrollable. And sometimes it was innocent, right? It starts as something that, you're trying to take your mind off of something else that's maybe really heavy in your heart. And in doing so, you start inadvertently using it as a crutch in life. And then it becomes something that you are dependent upon. Genetically, if these things are, if it's a genetic issue as well, you're really stuck. It's something that once it's activated, you're basically in a primal mode, and the brain is taking over, and you now just get to deal with the symptoms of what all of addiction is. And so, yeah. And like I said, what we're talking about tonight is trauma, and that our lives are impacted in so many different ways for so many different reasons. And the way that we respond to those things is very imperative to our survival. It's imperative to our mental health. It's imperative to our success moving forward from these experiences. And it's difficult. I get it. I've personally have had, quite a few things in my life that have impacted me profoundly. And not having the wherewithal to go seek therapy, not having the wherewithal to talk to people, not having the wherewithal to truly go through it, and trying to avoid it in all ways, shapes, and forms. It's a recipe for disaster. And I know that we live in this world of, you got to be strong, you got to handle your problems. We're here for each other.
Man. As being a man, you have to be significant. Your emotions are pushed to the side. Yeah.
Right. If this life has taught me anything, is that what's the most important thing in this world is each other. And so we have the ability to help each other. And, because we all have different life paths and we all learn at different frequencies and we all understand things at different ages. And, sometimes there are lots in this world that get, unfortunately, a bad set of circumstances constantly thrown at them through life. We only talk about the ones that we see that are successful and have made it, and don't discount successes that a lot of times success is shown 20 years after the fact of the hard work. Please don't let me, I'm not discounting success, but just the fact that there are a lot of times people just go through life unscathed in a sense, right? They almost like, a feather in their cap, or they had a rabbit's foot in their pocket, right? They seem to get away, where some people feel like they've got the unfortunate short end of the stick. And so it's managing these things, right? Mentally, psychologically, trying to not have it affect your behavior in your life, because that's one of the massive things that takes place, right? So I've talked enough.
Yeah. No, you hit on a lot of key points, and you talked about being a man. You have to kind of push your feelings to the side, kind of push your emotions to the side, even though you're dealing with things that are traumatic to you. I always say that I want people to understand that dealing with trauma, my trauma may not be your trauma. It may not, like, something serious to me, maybe something super small to you. How we cope with it and how we deal with it is a totally different thing. And that kind of builds, that kind of, gives us opportunity to look at us as people and our personality, as an individual, because sometimes people deal with things like, it's just like they just brush it off super easy. But the next individual, it'll drive them to a point of almost insanity. It depends on the individual. So trauma, and I always share about my traumatic experience. My biggest traumatic experience is the loss of my mother at a young age, and I still have never fully grieved over that. And I truly, honestly believe that that was the catalyst for me. That was the biggest, that was what kind of changed and altered my thought processes at that time. I'm not going to use, that's not an excuse, but I know for a fact that played a part in my decision making at a young age, and which led to my drinking and later down the line cocaine issue, which ultimately led to prison and everything that comes with it. So yeah, they are, trauma and addiction are very closely related. And you mentioned about your podcast. And when you mentioned about your podcast, can you give us a little insight on what your podcast actually, what your goal, the goal of your podcast?
It's really to give someone who has maybe questioned if they have potentially an issue in any way, shape, and form, from just truly understanding how the mind kind of works, right? From an addictive sense. Because we can become addicted to a lot of things, right? This thing right here is a huge devil in our lives, right now. And so we have to manage that, right? So there's so many ways that we can become addicted. And one of the drivers about it is the fact that we're constantly seeking a dopamine hit. And we start becoming dysregulated in dopamine production in our brains, all those feel-good hormones. And so a lot of things chemically change inside of us. Nonetheless, we dive into those things, right? I talk with professionals either in the therapeutic side. I give recommendations to doctors who have spoken about, the medical implications of what addiction does to us, and how you end up putting yourself, like I said, in this vicious loop that you're not going to recover from. But it's also about just helping people feel okay about the fact of this word addict. This addict word is very, very, very scary for people. And so it's not who we are, right? It's a disorder that we're battling, straight up, right? Addiction is a disorder. We're battling it. We have inadvertently put ourselves into a place, right? And now like I said, we've got ourselves that without help, we're never going to survive it. And help comes from the forms of abstinence, of obviously not using anymore, right? But more importantly, let's get into the pain as to why you feel like you're drinking all the time, if there is any, right? Let's get into past experiences. Let's get into how they started. Let's get into childhoods. Let's talk about life, so that way we can get to an understanding of what's going on in life that led us to this point. Because I've seen it a lot that there's usually something that's triggering these things. For me, a lot of it was mental health, and it was really unknown mental health issues. And, me being a Generation X kid, for example, right? I mean, I grew up in a school system that I basically had 3 classes in my grade. It was either you were the regular kids, if you will, whatever regular means nowadays, or you were the severely, mentally retarded, severely handicapped kids, right? They had their own special class and everything. But then you had this problem child class, right, where you usually had a drill instructor that was the teacher, right? And everybody was pushed into conformance. And now we come to find out that, well, those problem children is most likely were dealing with autism, potentially. They were dealing with ADHD. They were dealing with things that we come to discover later on in life with some of these things that we were trying to constantly put round pegs into square holes. This isn't going to work, right? So through our education in all these ways in psychology and understanding ourselves, we are understanding addiction more. And so with that understanding, we can remove the shame and the addiction, or the shame and the guilt, and just sit here and go, hey, you know what? This isn't just about, well, you know what? You should be strong enough to stop. This isn't that conversation anymore, right? You're not a bad person if you, well, dang it, you're not strong enough to stop. That's all BS. And it's scientifically proven now. So let's just stop that noise. Let's help people feel better about this whole thing of unfortunately slipping into addiction, because there are phases of it. We know this, right? Especially those that have been through addiction. We understand its progression, especially if we go through periods of sobriety and relapse. And those things become way more dangerous as they continue to occur. So we, again, need to get back to the root as to why we're slipping back in. And unfortunately, right, we have a habit, right? This thing that we do in our life becomes a habit, or that all of a sudden when we remove that habit, we now are left with all this time in our life. So then the question becomes, okay, well, now what do I do? Because I used to just get high all the time. And so people become scared because it's an uncomfortable new reality. And so because we are unable to sit in our stuff, in our bag, for any period of time, we constantly are those that want to ease our own suffering. And so we're constantly at a catch-22. So that's really what the podcast is about. It's about understanding that there's a community of people out here that understand that understand what addiction is. They love you. They're empathetic to your plight, and they are on your side, and they can help constantly raise you up, regardless of how many relapses you've had, and not look down upon you for it. Right? There's a lot of education out there that if you just understood it more, you'll start separating yourself from this thing and stop looking at yourself as such a horrid person to exist. And, you're scum of the earth, because you're not. Most of the brilliant people I've met in my life, highly functioning, highly successful, are all in my recovery group or detox.
Because that whole lifestyle, I'm not going to say it pushes you to be a better person. I'm not going to say that, but I am going to say that some of the things that we've been through, as people in addiction, if you don't learn from those things, and they can actually be tools to help you advance. There's definitely a negative. It's definitely negative. It's negative. Addiction is negative. But some of the things that we learn, and some of the things we go through, and some of the things that we slide through with in addiction, can definitely help us to elevate as an individual once we get the treatment, and start learning more about who we are and what our capabilities are, and that we don't have to rely on the chemical or the substance. And like you said, some of the most creative people that I met are either uh, addicts or at one point were prisoners, literally in prison. The talents that are in prison, that all that stuff kind of plays a part. But I think that we just get stuck on the negative side, and which is fair. But the the part about trauma and addiction coinciding, going together, is super. It's on a huge scale right now, and a lot of times I think people fail to realize the mental health side of it. And we don't have to stay stuck in either one of those. But I think a lot of the times they're separated. People separate them, even though they are conjoined. Because I always said this before. If I'm using a substance, like my drugs of choice were alcohol and crack cocaine. If I'm drinking on a regular basis and smoking crack on a regular basis, I don't know what's in this. I don't know what's in it, and I continue to use it. And then once I find out what it is, and I can still continue to use it, there's something going on up here that needs to be treated and worked on. But I just wanted to put that out there. I just wanted to shoot that out there. But I'm leaving it all up to you, Dusty. This is all up to you.
Yeah, and I agree with you. We are inadvertently in a point of irrationality. When we're in active addiction, we are irrational, right? We know that by the things that we do when we're in active addiction, right? We don't need to go get explicit on it. But again, we've probably gotten behind vehicles. We've probably have maybe spent too much money gambling. And I'm talking definitely about myself. So again, we are irrational. We are not in the right state of mind. And the problem becomes this. One of the biggest problems is that it's all at the very beginning. That's the thing that I recognize, right? It's at the very beginning where this matters the most, because once you stop using it, because I know that those that have ever questioned an addiction in their life, they're going to go through this process most likely. You're going to stop because you're going to test yourself, okay? And you're going to survive for 5 days. And because you survive for 5 days, you're rewarding yourself on Saturday. And maybe you overindulge. Most likely you will, but you felt like you earned it, right? So that right there, number one, tells me that no, you don't have any control, right? But number two, what's more importantly is that right? These, from what I've listened to from doctors, they state that, we're looking at 6 months to 2 years before we get hormone regulation again, all those feel hormone regulated again. It's going to take us that long from stopping an addiction to get ourselves back. So what makes you think that even if you stop for a month that you've beat this? Because you're still down in the dumps, right? You're still down in the dumps regulated wise. Right, your dopamine's still too low, and that's why you constantly get. And that's just it. You never get yourself to the point of actually truly feeling better, right? You end up just jumping back in before you've ever given your brain a chance to heal, and to sit there and go, "Hey, your life is okay without this stuff." And that's the problem, right? This becomes now an endurance issue, becomes a perseverance issue, because that's the one thing about this whole thing called recovery, right? You're going to get buy-in from people that you tell them, hey, this is 30 days, because they think that this is 30 days and I'm cured and I go on with my life. And you'll find out a couple weeks into it, nope, sorry. The reality of it is that you're going to be 6 months of intensive, and then you're going to be in this the rest of your life if you want to have a chance to make it out, but people go, no. I'm not willing to put my life on hold for that. Right. So now, again, we have an impatience issue, right? And or we have this is a personal character defect of mine. I'm just going to, again, do it on my own. And so you end up in this loop that's just ridiculous, cycle. Right? It's a nasty cycle. And even if you have the gumption to last for a long period of time, it's woe to that individual when they go and imbibe, because they'll usually relapse hard and they don't even recognize it as a relapse, but they could put themselves, into an OD situation inadvertently, right? And that's the thing that's just, so scary. You made a couple of comments, in that first go around that I wanted to bring up that I felt was important, is that you made the comment about, my trauma is not your trauma. And that's absolutely right. As far as the way that I feel my trauma may be different than the way that somebody else feels that trauma. But in just that regard, right, and understanding that should help us be empathetic to each other.
Yeah.
That should help us take a step back, right? And because that's part of the problem, right? Trauma over a lifetime can impact, the same events can impact two different people completely differently.
Different ways.
And we're not making excuses, right? But we are explaining some things that, unfortunately, because trying to understand your own psychology at 5 years old versus 10 or 15 years old is one thing, right? It's another thing coming to under and reflect and be able to sit there and truly, through true, good psychological education on what maybe you were experiencing back then. Because again, you're a kid in life just trying to survive. You don't recognize what's happened to you
at all.
And that's the thing also that's so what then becomes what needs to happen in society, right, is that we have to start looking out for each other in that regard. We have to start recognizing, hey, this individual has experienced something traumatic in their life. We have to pay attention to how their behaviors are, how they feel, how their self-worth is. We need to keep tabs on them.
Pay attention, yeah.
So here we go on a societal norm, right? We're also stinking busy. We have a hard time keeping our head above water. How am I supposed to pay attention to somebody else? So you could have that debate. But I agree with you. Having the right people in your corner is so huge. Having people in your corner that understand what you're going through, because that becomes just simply a phone call when you're struggling after a shitty day at work, right? Come over, or I need to come see you. Let's go take a drive. Let's do something, get my mind off of things, because I know that my go-to usually was, to go and crack one open, right? Which ended up being 6 and a couple, and some shots to go with it to help me pass out at the end of the day.
You better believe it.
I know. We're speaking languages. We understand the same language here, my man.
You better believe it. and the conversation is going to be a lot different when it's somebody that's already been there, that understands, versus somebody that is on the outside, that hasn't lived that lifestyle. The conversation is going to be totally different depending on who you talk to. And you just said it. Having people that are in your corner. But you want the people in your corner that are going to not pacify you, but people that are going to understand why you're feeling the way you're feeling and why you're saying the things that you're saying. Because the response that they're going to give you is going to be totally different than somebody that hasn't been through that. But go ahead.
Yeah. So that the viewers have or listeners have an understanding, of giving you a little taste of something that I experienced in my life that was very, very traumatic. And it was over basically a period of 8 years. First experience was in 2008 era. I basically lost everything, like a lot of people did, right? And I have a wife and kids, and so everything gone. So 11th hour, I was scrambling to find a rental to live in and everything else. And the thing that was a traumatic experience for me. And so, we talk about trauma from like death or victim of violent crime or, things like that. But losing everything that I'd worked for was very traumatizing to me. And it was such that, I felt like a failure, of course, right? I felt like a failure, in a lot of different levels, right? As a businessman, as a father, as a husband, because I didn't support my family, right? And so, so I started having to manage that trauma. And in the process of all that trauma, we had made the decision that I was going to basically just be a stay-at-home dad for a while, and we were going to try to welcome in another child into our life. In August of 2012, I had a daughter who went full term and then proceeded to live for 10 days and pass away. And that took me to a whole nother level of trauma, to the point in which it took me 5 to 7 years or so before I could talk about her without it ruining my day, just straight up ruining my day. And I So that was 2012. And then in 2016, the man who raised me, the one who I called dad, he passed away suddenly. And then within 6 months, I lost an aunt. And then another 6 months after that, I actually lost my biological father. And so, you know, and you sit there and you just go, I mean, again, what ends up happening, right, is that, you know, through all that trauma, you start having dialogues with God. I mean, I don't know how one does not, you know, at least that's where my faith takes me. And so, you know, your question, you know, why me, you know, why is this family experiencing these things? Why am I, you know? And so, and, you know, one of the things that you do, right, especially in all those time frames in which I had these events in my life, right? I knew that I was a father. I knew that I was a husband. I knew that I had to manage the other family members' shock from these events as well, right?
Yeah.
And so I don't think I allowed us to grieve together correctly. I didn't allow myself to grieve privately. I didn't allow myself to grieve with my wife in the correct ways, I don't think. And you end up basically going, life goes on. I got stuff to do. Yeah. I can't, you know, yeah. my kids are starting school. I can't, you know, I've got bills to pay. And so you end up disregarding this, right? And the reality is what happens is that it shows itself one way, shape, or form.
In another,
it shows itself, you know, it either shows itself in your personality, in your behaviors, and your outlooks, in your thoughts. It shows up in the way you're treating others.
Outbursts,
you know, and so yeah, you know, and then it, you know, it inadvertently sits there and goes, well, I'm going to release freaking pain because, you know, especially if I don't feel like God's helping me out on this, and no rest for the wicked apparently. So off I go, but I'll manage it, right? And you know, a lot of us become successful, you know, in managing our addiction for a long time. I always say, you know, if addiction showed us what it was capable of to us, first time we ever did any one of these substances, I think there'd be a lot less addicts in the world, because I think they'd sit there and they go, oh, but that's the problem with addiction, right? It's cunning, baffling, and powerful. It sneaks into your life.
Slowly.
Yeah.
And, you know,
slowly
and takes everything.
You know, and we don't, we're not introspective enough, right? I think that, you know, there's a great quote that says, you know, the greatest thing a man can do in this world is not change the world, but change himself. And I thought on that, and I said, you know, that's remarkable. My faith has shown me that, you know, through everything that I've read, you know, Holy Bible, etc., right? It's shown me that this world does not change. The only thing that changes is technology, but we still constantly fight with each other. We still constantly have, you know, these disagreements, these times of peace, these times of war, these disagreements between political parties, you know, these disagreements between religions. Life doesn't change. It's never changed. It's always the same as it's always been, right? So the fortunate thing is we are all here for a limited time. So with that time, my three questions are, how did I get here? What am I doing here? And where am I going? Because I recognize this, you know, and so if we don't spend the time to be introspective like that, right? And again, I think that requires change, right? It requires invoking change. And that's part of the problem with addiction, right? Is that you have to get to the psychological point that you're like, I've got a problem. That's your strongest moment. That's your strongest moment that people don't even realize. You know, it's not your weakest moment. Your strongest moment is sitting there going, I have a problem and I need help like right now. Because this ain't getting any better. Right, I sure as hell can't control it, but I've come to realize it, you know?
That's a crucial thought right there.
Right.
That's definitely the crucial thought. And do you remember when you first came to the realization that that there was a problem? I mean, I can remember mine. And, you know, for me, it was 2018. And I was with one of my friends, and we were, you know, out in the street doing what we were doing. And the thought, you know, I was just tired, really like drained and tired of doing what I was doing and with no results. You know, the results that I was, you know, nothing moving forward. The results that I was getting was the same results and the same pain that I was feeling. the same feeling of discouragement, the same feeling of abandonment, the same feeling of just feeling like I'm letting myself down on top of letting everybody else down, and
Right.
I'm not moving anywhere, I'm not progressing. For me, it was 2018 when I made a decision that I wanted to make an attempt to try to get some help. And I left from where I was at and went to another area and sought help. And that was the key moment for me. It was a while, that was years ago, it felt like eons ago. But yeah, I remember that. I remember the day, and I remember how I felt on that ride to get to where I was going, even though my stomach was still flipping and I kind of wasn't sure if I really wanted to go in because the thought of using was still there, and after I finally got settled in, then, and working on the thought processes, that's when things started to turn around slightly. You know, maybe I can do this. Just that whole maybe part was there. But do you remember your first uh, encounter with the thoughts that you can do
You
it?
know, so I talked earlier in the show just about the things that we do in addiction and stuff, and unfortunately that was kind of my path. I had recognized, probably, I think it's probably been like 22 years ago now. 22 years ago. I remember distinctively 4 o'clock in the morning at a casino, basically looking up from the porcelain throne that I was puking into, basically looking up at my wife going, I don't know why I do this. I literally said that to her. I don't know why I do this to myself. Because what ended up happening, right, is that I'll be sitting at a blackjack table and I'll be having a vodka on the rocks. That's basically what I do. Straight to the point. And I'd have one, maybe I'd have a second one. Say, hey, I'm going to go upstairs. I'm like, all right, I'll be up in a little bit. That'd be 11 o'clock at night. And then 3 o'clock in the morning, I'm down a couple grand, probably another at least half a dozen of those vodkas in my belly, basically, and now basically paying the consequence for it and looking up at her going, I don't know why I do this to myself. And the thing is that, again, addiction is cunning, baffling, and powerful, right? When you get that massive, strong hangover the next day, right? And you're trying to drive home from where you were at and what was a fun weekend turned into freaking Regretville. And you sit there and you swear it off. Well, you know what happens? All of that hangover symptoms go away magically.
Yeah.
And like
I'll never do it again.
You're like,
I won't do it again.
I got control. I won't go that hard, right? And so I played that game for a long time. In 2008, I did quit. I quit because of interacting with the law. And so I recognized at that point that I had a problem. I started talking to a psychiatrist about it. And obviously I had to do the DUI mandated class, right? But I had quit until and here's the kind of the interesting thing. I quit literally basically at the time everything failed in my life. My businesses failed. And so that was probably, that should have been a clue for me that with that stopping, but still having all these things in my heart and in my mind and everything else told me that I should have been going to therapy, right? I should have been addressing maybe some mental health things that I needed to get out of it. And I didn't do that, right? I just, again, muscled through, worked out more. And the reality of it was, right, as I was frying my nervous system. My nervous system was already fried. Now I'm frying myself even more. And so, but then in 2015, I gave myself permission to drink. We know what happens how that happens. So I didn't realize at the time, right, that I was just simply abstaining, right? I didn't learn anything about sobriety. I just simply assumed that it was what it was, that I just stopped and I'm good. And so when I started again, it was that whole year that I lost those 3 family members in my life. And it was by month 12 that I'll never forget it. I had my mother, again, here we are at a casino again, and my mother's screaming at me because I'm just freaking obliterated. And the problem is that my mental health really takes a shit. It takes a shit even more when I'm drunk. And so, so when I don't give a shit and I don't care is coming out of my mouth, right? That's not the way I normally am. So, but then I ended up quitting again, right? And again, I didn't realize that all I was doing was just basically abstaining, and I was setting myself up for another relapse that was most likely going to be worse than the one I just did. And sure enough, it was basically 5-6 years later, I gave myself permission, and it was a year and a half worth of a downward spiral that was just the symptoms got worse. And the excessiveness just got worse without, any sort of, as far as like, throwing up consequences and things like that, right? I was just doing it, and I was just killing myself in the process. But what happened was that I made the admission at the beginning of August of 23. And I went to a doctor. And then I went to a doctor. I set up a schedule with a psychologist. I set up a schedule with a psychiatrist. And I ended up basically, like, in a couple of days of me basically making the admission, I put myself into ER because I recognized that I wasn't getting away from this, right? They send me, after they detox me and everything else, they send me home. We do all this stuff, and I'm basically like waiting for these meetings and everything else. But again, the problem is that I was left alone. And when somebody makes an admission that they're an addict and they need to seek help, you cannot let them go for 1 minute without basically putting them in a set. And so I literally had probably another 6 or 7 benders. And it was basically around the 21st of August. I had come home basically from the casino, and had drove home drunk as a skunk, and basically sitting in my truck, and my mom's yelling at me, my wife screaming in my ear, and I'm basically like, I don't give it anymore. And she's like, how much did you drink? And I said, not enough. And it was at that point, it was game over. And so nobody left my side after that. So I basically I called in sick, basically went into FMLA. 3 days later, I went into a detox because that's when they had the bed available for me. And so they found it crazy. They said, you're the most sober guy that's coming in a detox we've ever seen. And I'm like, well, the thing is that the time was ticking because I was getting ready to go again. So I need to be here.
So you said
so that's
the time. You said the time was ticking. When you said the time was ticking, what did you mean by that? Did you mean that you were going to actually go out the door?
Well, it's just I recognized that I had no longer control of myself. I had this illusory control over myself. And I'd also put on the mask. I had a mask that I could basically present to the world. And and the problem is that with addiction, right, you can do that for a while, but at some point
you got it all together.
Or at some point you just look like it's written all over your face as much as you sit there and present the same mask. People see it. It's physically now showing on you, right?
Everybody will see it but us.
And so I do think, one of the things that was enlightening for me in recovery was understanding this notion of a normie versus somebody who's an addict. And it's important for normies to understand it. You didn't cause it, you can't control it, and you can't cure it. So it's something that we recognize we have to live with our whole lives. And the way we stay successful is by not using. And it's really but life is richer in sobriety. All that time that you were doing using, you can now put into your hobbies. You can now put in just being present, right? When people are truly in recovery, one of the things that I've experienced is that I feel definitely way more present in my life than I ever have been. And I think that from that regard, right, in from a perspective of just becoming a better person, right, always working on being present is a beautiful thing, right? Because that's what we have, that's what we have, the present.
So when you say being present, can you elaborate on what you mean by being present? What does that mean to you?
First of all, try to not future trip, right? Try to not future trip and worrying about things, that are unknowns. Addicts have the wonderful notion of overthinking a lot of things. And from what I understand, the stats are that we almost think like at twice the amount of thoughts as somebody that doesn't deal with an addiction. And I think that that's just the nature of our beast. We at times perceive time differently, right? So we start crawling in our own skin because things are taken too slow, and our anxiousness starts kicking in, and our biorhythm just not in line with things. So it's learning to start, calming ourselves down, starting to maintain a presence. But again, and so what does that mean? It means trying to not dwell on the past, right? It's trying to not future trip and worry. And the thing, if traumatic events teach us anything, right, it's that we do not know what's going to happen tomorrow. And so, being grateful and having gratitude, recognizing the blessing is here. Because, the one unfortunate thing with addicts, right, is that we do regret at times, our lack of presence, right? And maybe formidable years to people that we love. So we in a sense, want to try to do a makeup, right? And I've kind of taken a little bit of a different approach with my kids. I've been very transparent with what I struggle with. I want them to understand. I want them to be able to feel confident in talking to me about things that they ever have concerns with, right? I want to continue to break down walls, right? I mean, that's what we should be doing in life, right? Is just breaking down walls and helping each other. And so I think that it's okay to talk about, what mental health is like, right? What are mental health issues, right? How do they look? And even, recognizing your own faults, right? Recognizing things that you could work on just to become better person, right? And be wholly you. Because I think that, regardless of what, I think Christ put it best, right? Regardless of what's burdening you, pick up the cross and keep carrying it. We all got to do something like that. We all get to do something like that. And that's just it. So basically, if we all get to do something like that, then let's pick it up and quit our bitching and just go for it. Let's
just do it.
We crave authenticity in this world more than ever. It's been talked about a lot in some of the things that I've seen lately, because we're tired of the fluff. We're tired of perceptions being skewed, and force feeding it down our throats. We're tired of, so we crave, what is the truth? And people are afraid to go into books, and people can mistrust the internet and AI now with its thing. It's like, where's the truth at, right? And so I think that, us doing things like this, right, and trying to connect with people and talk to people about these things, we don't know what's going on in each other's heads. We don't. We only know it when we talk about it, right?
We talk about
it. And so the hope is, right, I know with what you're doing here, Life Chat, it's so perfect, right? And with, Addict's Advocate, with just trying to be motivational with life. Be motivational with life, right? Hey, with everything that's seeming trying to burden us down, right? This is still a pretty freaking awesome place. And how we got here is still a freaking amazing reality. And the fact that we're present, that we know that we're here, is another pretty freaking amazing reality. And so what we're doing here and where we're going is very important. I've had the opportunity to recognize that having abundance isn't necessarily fulfilling. The obtaining of material wealth is inherently empty, in my opinion. I've been on that side. I've been on the side where I've been scraping, to change, for the week. And so I think purpose is important. Purpose is probably the most important thing, right? What are we doing? What is our purpose in life? And I feel blessed in a crazy reality of that, having gone through this, through addiction and now dealing with recovery, that I feel like, hey, you know what? Let's break down some walls. Let me help you understand what this is all about. Let's understand that, again, I'm advocating for you to seek help. It's all good, and it's okay. It's okay,
All right. And you mentioned about purpose before we wrap this up. You just mentioned about the purpose and, just being grateful that we made it through what we've been, we're making it through what we've been through, with the situations that we had to deal with. And now we're able to share our experiences with other people. And it takes me back to the adage of one addict helping another without parallel. And it's not, but honestly, it's not even all about the addiction part. It's about what we talked about earlier, the situations that we went through prior, because I think, as we know, the addiction, the substance use, is this much of the issue, where the previous experiences, whatever we went through that led us to using that, is the actual culprit. And I talked about that a few nights ago in another episode, another show that I was on about, just the fact that we're talking about trauma as well. We're talking about a lot of different things, but the fact that the situation, the underlying issue is the actual problem. The substance use is basically, they call it the symptom. They say it's the symptom of the problem. So we used to cope, we used to try to cover up, we used to try to mask, but the actual problem is the part that we have to deal with and work on. And then everything else will basically fall in place. But go ahead.
Gabor Mate, I think he's a very famous addiction. Talks about addiction a lot and understanding the psychology of it. And he goes, talk to me about your addiction. Talk to me about your pain. And I'm like, that's profound, because I believe that that's an important way to look at it. Because the first thing addicts will do, right, is we'll constantly throw the defensive, hey, you don't understand what I'm going through. I need this to survive. I'm good. You don't get it, right? Leave me alone, right? And that's and so we want to find a way to break down those walls. And because I came from the notion too, when I was really I knew I had a mental health issue and I knew that I needed to address it, but I was dealing with guilt and shame from that perspective as well too. Once I recognized it for what it was and going through that process, right, I ended up starting to look back too and go, well, was it the addiction that caused the mental health issues, or was it the mental health that caused the addiction issues? And so the irony is that in managing my mental health, it's just yay. I mean, because I've never done it before. I never did it before. Truly. Right. Truly. So, Derek, this has been awesome, man. I appreciate you doing this and sharing with the world everything that you're doing and going through this. Cause I think the world needs this more.
Yeah. We're definitely gonna wrap this up, but I just want to say thank you again, because we both we have lives, we have things to do, and you're busy and I'm not. But we're gonna wrap this up, and I did want you to just do one more thing for me, for the people that are watching or the people that will watch later. Just throw your information out, give you information of where people can find you, and how to search for you and what your information is.
Yeah, no problem. I'm across basically just about every platform. TikTok, Instagram, you can find me on the Addict'S Advocate or Addict'S Advocate. But I'm the only one with the cross on the emblem with the microphone photos, so you'll see who I am. I do a lot of shorts on there, try to put something out every day, if not every other day. From there, my full-length videos, conversations that I have with mental health professionals, people that are in recovery and their experiences, some of the stories that I've been able to listen to and hear, and the struggles that people have endured and the things that they've done in addiction and how they've recovered. It's truly remarkable. Those full-length episodes can be found on YouTube in full audio video format under the Addict'S Advocate as well. I am also basically available via audio through podcast systems like Spotify, Apple, Google, iHeartRadio. So yeah, I'm just about everywhere. I also do have a website. So
you really are the superstar. All right, but that's it. That's all I have, man. If you don't have anything else, I'm done. I just want to say thank you for coming on again. Thank you for contacting me. I thank you, for accepting my invite, and for everybody that's watching now, everybody that will be watching later, thank you for your support. Thank you for your time. I appreciate you. Have a great night. Be blessed. Good night.
Welcome to the Life Chat Podcast, seeking the truth with Derek Powell, navigating you through. Every Wednesday night, new topics ignite. Join the journey, let's take flight. Bringing insights that change our view. Derek's voice, clear and true. Tune in each week, discover new light. Life Chat Podcast, reach a new height.